Hello there and welcome to another Kenny vs. Spenny season review. This is season 4 now, and season 4 to a lot of people is considered the best season, so let's just go right into it. So first competition is who can get a boner first, or first guy to get a boner loses. And already off the bat, we're off to a very great start. I love this episode. It is hilarious. Basically, both Kenny and Spenny, for that matter, are trying their best to make sure that they don't get a boner. And if they get a boner, well, they instantly lose. And of course, there's a lot of things that could probably, cause it, such as morning wood, for example. And of course, Kenny decides to go to his brother, who is a doctor, to get these nerve-blocking injections so that he can't get an erection. So Kenny already automatically wins just by that virtue. But the best part has to be, aside from Spenny trying to get Kenny to get a boner, but obviously can't, and he doesn't know why, such as getting his cousin, who Kenny does find very attractive, try and do a striptease for him and nothing happens. But no, the best part has to be the ending, the strip club bit. It is hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. Even just thinking about it makes me laugh. Kenny and Spenny, they both get each other a stripper. Spenny gets this really sexy lady. Obviously, Kenny, he won't get a boner no matter what because he's got the injections, so he's automatically won. But Spenny, he gets this, male stripper, and it's hilarious seeing Spenny freak out. But then what comes next is hilarious. So, throughout the competition, they're wearing these, really tight pants so that, it's really obvious when they've got an erection. And so what we get is... absolutely hilarious. The male stripper, of course, he's grinding on Spenny. And Spenny, throughout the series, he's always taunted that he's gay and all that. Spenny gets a boner and he rushes into the bathroom. Kenny realizes it, he sees it, and it's great. Of course, Spenny comes up with all these excuses as to why it's happened, and of course, the truth is, it's because of the grinding. Let's be honest. He claims that, I was looking at the female stripper. It's it's just great. This episode from already just hits such a high bar. I don't know whether I had this on my favorites list or is the runners up for the favorites list, because this is such a strong episode that it's you can't help but love it. It is funny, it is fantastic, it's a great start to the series, and even the humiliation is quite funny, very Jackass inspired, with the genitalia and the bees. But yeah, already we're off to a very good start. I don't know what else to say. This is a hilarious episode. If you're a fan of Kenny vs. Spenny or you want to get into it, this is a very good episode to start off with. Season 4 in general is a good season just watch as a whole. And right from the start, it's just hitting the high notes. It's only going to get better from here. So the second episode of season 4 is perhaps the most famous Kenny vs. Spenny episode of all time. It's, I believe, the most viewed episode, aside from Octopus. I think Octopus might be a little bit more viewed, actually, come to think about it. But this one's so famous that there's pictures, there's GIFs of the one scene where Kenny is on the stairwell and he's just letting rip in that pink onesie, and Spenny's face is just in gore. This is also one of those competitions where, surprisingly, it is rather legitimate. Up until the end, obviously, but it's rather legitimate. And basically, Kenny and Spenny, they have to record themselves farting. It's who can blow the biggest fart. And the idea is, if they can fart the loudest, they win the competition. And the funny thing is, Spenny technically won this competition because he actually had the loudest fart at one point, and even Kenny could hear it from downstairs or upstairs, wherever he was. And Spenny had the recording device the wrong way round, so it didn't record properly. Kenny ultimately ends up winning, and he then decides he's going to enforce that victory by blowing air up his ass, which apparently is very dangerous to do, by the way. And that's when you get the infamous stair scene. That's where, he's on the floor. He actually cuts himself at one point. There's blood on the floor. And, he's just letting out gas. Spenny gives up in the end. Yeah, like this is this is such a simple episode. It's such a self-contained episode. Like they're indoors, in the house the whole time. They're not going out to public or anything like that. Well, they do a few times, but they're mostly indoors and mostly together, and it is just hilarious banter from beginning to end. You know, it's actually a legit competition, which is also one of the better points of this episode, because I do like episodes where they are legitimately competing with each other. You know, it's why the sleep episode is so fantastic and it's one of the best, because you know they're legitimately doing the competition as opposed to just cheating and seeing who, you know, cheats the better, I guess. And you know, the episode has a lot of hilarious points to it. I mean, you'd be surprised that fart humor would be quite funny, but it is in this episode, in this circumstance. I would not call it a top 5 worthy episode, though. You know, I think I had this number 6 in my top 10 favorite episodes. It's still in the top 10 for sure. This is definitely a top 10 episode, but I wouldn't say it's top 5. I think a lot of people do over exaggerate how good this episode is. I don't think it's that good necessarily, especially when you have like ones like Imitate or Octopus or, you know, Sleep, as I just mentioned. I think those ones are much better in my opinion. Or Beer, that's even more better in fact. But this is still a very good episode, still a fantastic episode. I do like the fact that at the end you have the national farting champion of Canada, which is very bizarre. Why they have these sort of competitions. It reminds me of that guy from Jackass 3D, you know, Will the Farter, was it? Who was born without an anus, or born without a butthole, and they had to cut one open and he just can let rip, like, any time. And Spenny's forced to just get farted on the faces. I mean, someone out there is probably masturbated to this episode, which is very disturbing to think about. Probably Spenny, come to think about it. But yeah, this is probably one of the most famous episodes of the show. Almost everyone knows about it. Even people who don't know about Kenny versus Spenny, they recognize the scene where he's on the stairs farting and Spenny's face is just there. I think, you know, if you go on many different social media websites, that GIF is used a lot. But yeah, this is a infamous episode, famous episode, very good episode, definitely in the top 10. So far, Series 4 is just kicking ass. Who can make the best viral video? Now, this has a really fun fact to it. In this particular episode, Kenny's future wife actually appears during this. It's the one where, you know, she's about to flash her tears and then Kenny jumps up instead. That woman ends up marrying Kenny later on. And it's a really interesting fact to consider, you know. So basically, this episode is another rather legitimate episode. And it's funny because I initially slept on this episode, but rewatching it, I found it to be really enjoyable. Basically, Kenny and Spenny have to create like their own videos, and they have to get the best hits, and the best hits obviously win. The funny thing is, this whole episode is very legitimate. Like, both Kenny and Spenny are both legitimately trying. They're both trying to go ahead with their sort of viral videos. Spenny is doing all this research to try and do it. So is Kenny, in fact. And, you know, they come up with this varied range of, you know, wild, wacky stuff. The Spenny stuff is quite funny, though, because he, at one point, has the babies and dogs, which, you know, the babies are crying, the dogs are just making a mark, the puppies I meant, and it's just, it's so cringe where we've seen Spenny try and do anything. Kenny ultimately wins, although Spenny surprisingly is very close. You know, he's very close, surprisingly. But all the Kenny ideas, yeah, they range from like over the top stuff that you've seen on YouTube like in the good old days, and stuff which, let's be honest, now is rather offensive, but who cares? I love this episode. It's a really fun episode. It's one of those legitimate competition episodes which I really like. It's just a lot of fun, let's be honest now. It's just a lot of fun, and seeing all the creative different ideas is great. Seeing Spenny struggle but surprisingly get quite close to winning is pretty good. I will say this, humiliation does kind of suck. Spenny is forced to lick the door handle of an adult video store because the idea is that, people have been masturbating, people have been, doing all sorts of stuff, and they've probably got all sorts of disease, and they've been touching the door. And so that's sort of the joke of it, but honestly, it's a very lame humiliation, I will say, which is a shame because the actual episode is a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. It's not necessarily top 10 worthy, it's not necessarily top 15 or top 20 worthy, but it is a fun episode. It's definitely a good, fun episode. Who can eat more meat? Now, I've mentioned before, I really don't like episodes where Spenny wins, because more often than not, they're really dull episodes, or how do I put it? Spenny is just really irritating when he wins. And to be fair, a lot of those episodes are really bad episodes. I'm just going to be honest, a lot of Spenny win episodes are really bad. However, there are a few exceptions, and Who Can Eat More Meat is one of those exceptions. It's a bit like the Haunted House episode. That's a really good episode, even if Spenny wins. And this one is a Spenny win episode, and it's also very good. Basically, Spenny is struggling to do all this meat challenges. He can't really do it, or he can't really eat this meat as ferociously as Kenny is. Like, Kenny is just devouring meat. He's like gobbling everything up. He's like ripping it up in front of Spenny. He's like eating like all sorts of crap, one from the other. And the idea is to getting more weight or eat more weight in the meat. And Kenny is just dominating Spenny. Like, Spenny even vomits at one point. He can't handle it. Spenny is just not doing very well. He can't eat meat that as well as Kenny, I should say. But then something happens. Kenny, because he had been eating so much, because he had eaten raw meat as well, he ends up being very sick. The first notion is when he's at his mum's house and he vomits on the plate. And apparently in a deleted scene, he ends up eating. Yeah, I don't really want to think about that. But, but then we get the dinner table scene. And this is just hilarious to watch. It's disgusting, but it's hilarious at the same time. You have Kenny and Spenny are sat opposite each other. Kenny is not looking well. He's looking very feverish almost. And then he just vomits on the table, and Spenny just jumps out the chair, and then he just continues vomiting. And then he's on the stairs, and he vomits down the stairs as well. It's horrific. And this is one of the most disgusting episodes of the show, but it's also really hilarious at the same time. This is what I would say is a top 15 worthy episode. This is really up there. Really good episode, or top 20 maybe. Come to think about it, but I really like this episode. Spenny's sudden win, just because he eats a very small percentage more than Kenny in the end. I think Kenny he ate a lot, but then Spenny ate 0.34% more. But literally that was a close call. Spenny was victorious. This episode also has a commentary, as Kenny puts it, and the commentary is really interesting, listening to him and Sebi talk about this particular episode. I believe he mentioned he got ill. It wasn't anything to do with food poisoning that got him, I don't think. I'm trying to remember the commentary video. I don't think it was anything to do with food poisoning, and I think he just got ill at that same time. And he overindulged himself at the same time, which resulted in him just vomiting violently, and he ended up being out of the competition. He was sat on the toilet for a long period of time. He was just in a bad shape. And, he blames himself because he's trying to entertain the fans. And the fans, obviously, let's be honest, it is an entertaining episode nonetheless. But, yeah, it is probably one of the worst, moments for Kenny in general. Kenny always gets the best stuff, and he is the funnier out of the two. He is the one that does a lot more of the more exciting moments, etc. And to see him suffer this badly, it's almost heartbreaking to watch. But it's also really entertaining, this episode. The humiliation at the end is, I'm betting you this is another one of Spenny's fetishes. I mean, he's already admitted to certain fetishes, but I think this is one of his other fetishes, because this is a very fetishized humiliation that Spenny has. It's Kenny making out with an old lady. Not the best humiliation, but at the same time, I think in the commentary, Kenny even says, like, this is definitely one of Spenny's, like, fetishes. Like, he's into it. Like, all of his stuff is always really sexual for some reason. And, yeah, this is probably a good example of it. But overall, Who Can Eat More Meat is a very good episode. As I said, it's probably top 20, maybe top 15 worthy in terms of Kenny versus Spenny episodes. It's a really good episode. And once again, Series 4 is just kicking ass. Up next is one of the best episodes of the show's history. This is First Guy to Get a Stain Losers. I love this episode. I think everyone loves this episode. Like, I don't think there's a single person that hates this particular episode. It is great. Both of them are dressed up in this sort of like white onesie. The idea is they're not allowed to get a stain. However, this particular episode exploits the issues with the rule system that Spenny always puts up, because what counts as a stain? Well, someone could get a stain for just walking on the ground for a bit. Or, Kenny could just spit on Spenny and get a stain, etc. Basically, anything can result in a stain. And Kenny exploits this throughout the whole episode. He's constantly, exploiting the rule system, constantly making fun of it, constantly, belittling Spenny. And I love the little title cards that keep popping up with the humiliation time. And of course, Spenny says, no. And the rules change again and again and again. It's a really funny episode in that aspect. I think it's really enjoyable. But at the same time, it's just, the idea of it is just great. Like, the idea of these two men having to be dressed up in this weird looking, like, white onesie, or what is it called? It's not called a onesie. It's called something else. I forgot the name of it. Morph suit thing. It's funny seeing them like that. And it's funny seeing them, just, having to avoid every little object. Spenny has these little, like, grappers to try and, like, pick things up, or he's got this belt around him. And I love the fact that the suit that Spenny has is so, like, tight that his, like, face, like, squeezes out. I don't know why, but it just looks so stupid and funny, like how puffy he looks there. So Kenny, he exploits the rules constantly. It's just hilarity from the beginning to the end. And eventually gets to a point where, like, the rule system is just not working. We're going to have to change the competition entirely. So it's like, who can get the most stains? And of course, this is where you have a series of mini competitions. Spenny just loses massively. There was a deleted scene which involved a competition that happened before the paintballs, in which they were at this, like, what is it called, this ice cream shop, and they were, like, doing stuff with chocolate and all that, and it was getting all over Spenny and all that. It's why he's got this big brown stain before the paintball competition, which is quite interesting to acknowledge. But and another behind-the-scenes fact is the dog running in and out actually happened multiple times. It took multiple takes before eventually the right take could happen. So it makes you wonder, like, if Spenny was in on that, perhaps probably they had to, refilm and stage a few bits. But it doesn't take away from the value of this episode, I should say. The mini competitions, you got the paintball. Spenny gets humiliated in that. You got the coffee stains, they both kind of get burnt with coffee. You get the, tug of war, Spenny loses that. Just basically, like, throughout this competition, it is just Spenny getting fucked with, and, it eventually comes down to the Choco Sabers, and Spenny once again loses. And I just love how Spenny is so determined to still win, even though he's just covered head to toe with shit. And so, obviously Kenny wins. We then get the Zorb ball, and the ball is used early in the episode by Spenny trying to avoid getting a stain, which technically is cheating, I think. But he gets pissed on anyway, so who cares? Meanwhile, the humiliation is just brutal. Like, he has to be put into the Zorb ball with some dog shit inside, and he's pushed down a hill, and it's horrible. I can't. I just can't. Like, very good humiliation, a very good episode. Like, this is genuinely one of the best episodes of the show's history. Like, really good fucking episode. Who doesn't love Who Can Get a Stain, or First Guy to Get a Stain? So, another one of my top 10 favourite episodes, and this is Who Can Be Tied to a Goat the Longest. This is the best animal episode by far. You know, when it comes to the animal episodes, there's this episode, which is definitely the best. There's also the Chicken Coop one, which is another really good episode. But that's in Series 6. This is Series 4. And Who Can Be Tied to a Goat the Longest is great. The episode idea is a bizarre one. I love these out of... like these wacky, like, bizarro fucking competitions where you don't know what the fuck is actually, you know, the thought process behind it. Like, you know, Dead Octopus, like, who comes up with those sort of ideas? And so Tied to the Goat Longest is another great example of this. You know, Kenny and Spenny, they get tied to a goat. Kenny thinks ahead, like, as per usual. He thinks ahead. He knows that female goats are lighter in, you know, weight. They're less likely to just be boisterous and jump all over the place. But also, he gets a really long rope, so he can just go upstairs. The goat can be downstairs. He can go downstairs. The goat can be upstairs. You know, he can go anywhere. Where Spenny gets a really short rope, has a male goat who's very, you know, has very large testicles and is rather boisterous as well. And so, you know, it's just great. I love the little, like, improv scenes of Kenny and the goat psychiatrist has got these goofy glasses on. It's just like chewing its teeth and just going at Eddie saying, like, what Spenny has done to him in the past. I love that scene so much. I love the ways he fucks around with the goats as well. You know, the little toy car to annoy Spenny's goat, the caffeine to make it go all hyper and insane, the, you know, pissing on Spenny's bed, or, you know, doing all sorts of other fucked up things to Spenny, just outright trying to get him to go insane. You know, one of the things I forgot to mention about the meat episode is he did something similar where he just dumped a bunch of meat on Spenny's bed, trying to, like, just gross him out. And I like he tries to do the same thing here. You know, he's trying to do the same thing where he's trying to gross out Spenny, trying to get him to go all crazy. Spenny is still trying to be determined. And, you know, after a while he thinks, how am I going to get Spenny to give up? Well, he decides to get the goat killed. He finds a skinned lamb and he puts it on the table. And Spenny sees it. He's just shocked. He takes off the rope and he is about to give up. However, what he didn't realise is that the rope is actually tied to another foot. The rope is also tied to another object, which happens to be the goat inside the cabinet, and Spenny is humiliated. And the humiliation was a humiliation which I felt like they wanted it to work. It wanted it to be like the Wild Boys thing with the, the alpacas, where, you know, he's in a costume and he gets raped by a goat. But it doesn't happen that way. The goat doesn't really bother doing anything, which is a shame, because I think, you know, it would have been funny to see if the goat was really, you know, active, so to speak. I will say this, I do think is a little bit strange that Spenny doesn't ever see the rope tied to Kenny's other foot. Like, he just doesn't. And I think even Kenny, like, tugs at the rope at one point, you know, sort of to indicate it's actually attached to me. Like, he doesn't see both ropes. I don't know. Like, that always seemed to be off for me. Like, the ending does feel a little bit off, but it doesn't take away from this episode. This episode is hilarious from beginning to end. The gags are great. The humiliation, the pranks, and all that all work well. It's the best animal episode by far. Obviously, the second best one is still to come, but still, it's a really good episode and definitely my top 10. Who Can Handle More Torture is a bit like the the male stripper episode, in the sense that Kenny is purposely losing. And the reason why he's purposely losing is because, technically speaking, Spenny is going through the humiliations already. Like, Kenny doesn't need to go through the humiliations. He's purposely cheating. He's purposely avoiding doing this. He's purposely losing for the sake of getting Spenny to just make a fool of himself. And Spenny is none the wiser throughout this. He doesn't ever like pick up on the fact, okay, maybe Kenny is purposely doing this to make me look like an idiot. No, he just goes through it. He is willing to go through torture. He's a series of mini competitions just for the sake of trying to beat Kenny. And I love the fact that Kenny, despite it all, you know, he does still go through with a few of them to try and, like, you know, not raise too much suspicion. But ultimately, you know, in the end, especially with how bad the humiliation is, like, the humiliation is awful in this. Kenny has to do improvisation, which he hates, and it's not a very good one. Honestly, it's a very bad humiliation, but technically speaking, the humiliation was throughout the whole episode. Spenny was getting humiliated. I love the little change of dynamic as well. Unlike Male Stripper, where Kenny had like a little change of heart at the end, this one I quite like because from the get-go, Kenny already knows he's going to lose his competition, but he's going to do it in a way that no matter what, he still technically wins. And that's by just fucking up Spenny. Really good episode, honestly. It's on the weaker end of the Series 4 episodes, I will say, but it's still a strong episode. You know, Series 4 hasn't had a bad episode so far, and it seems to be staying that way. First guy to stop singing loses. Now, this episode to a lot of people is one of the most annoying episodes. I can see why even the production seemed to get really annoyed by it, because you have Kenny and Spenny singing constantly and it's really annoying, and of course their throats start to give way and they can't start singing. But at the same time, this is just a highly entertaining episode. I love the moment where Spenny, you know, he's casually just singing, casually just walking past, and there's a really long train. he's just casually walking past. He goes into the bedroom, and then all of a sudden you hear, you know, the brilliant song, which is Spencer Rice is a fucking fuck. I love that so much. Like, that particular scene is my favourite scene in the entire episode. It makes you wonder, though, like, how Kenny was not counted out as losing, because he's not singing beforehand, but then he does sing, you know, during that moment. I still love the episode, you know, despite some people finding it very annoying of them to just singing and being loud and obnoxious. Like, the production got annoyed as well. But I quite like this episode in that sense. I love the fact that, you know, Kenny, at one point, his voice just goes. So he goes to this choir, and he's in the choir, and you see him lip syncing. And what's quite funny is that he's wearing this Hitler shirt throughout the episode with Spenny's dad on it. And at the choir, you can see that he's turned the shirt inside out to avoid being caught by, obviously, his fellow Jews, because that would be rather bad. So yeah, like, overall, this episode, I know some people find it annoying. I like it, so I don't hate it. You know, I will say this, the humiliation is kind of lame. Kenny, you know, acts as an organ grinder on the street with Spenny pretending to be the little monkey running around with a little cup. That's kind of a lame humiliation, but overall, it's a decent episode. I do like the fact that Spenny just kind of gave up as well. Like, he was like, oh, I can't do this anymore. But yeah, I quite like this episode. I think it's quite underrated in some ways, but it's still a solid episode. You know, Series 4, again, I keep reiterating, hasn't had a bad episode so far. Who Can Be Obese the Longest is another episode which is definitely in my top 15. Basically, both Kenny and Spenny have to wear weights, and the idea is they wear weights to be obese. And Spenny has this mind-numbingly stupid contraption, which is just a bunch of like string holding on to some weights on this jacket, which makes no sense whatsoever. Well, Kenny outright just gets these fancy, like, typical weight things that you just wear, and you don't have to, like, you know, carry around shit. And of course, Spenny, being like the hardcore, I need to be, you know, playing the competition properly sort of guy, he gets annoyed. He even goes to production staff and says, like, why the hell can I not get it? Because they say, well, that's because Kenny is smart. He just asked for it. And Spenny gets really upset when he gets told that he's stupid. Like, he really does not like it. I always love those moments where Spenny is, like, told the harsh truth by other people. Like, he genuinely thinks that people really think that he's smart and intelligent and all that, and really he isn't. But Kenny decides to cheat straight away. Like, he does what he does in Octopus, where he takes off the weights. Or in Octopus, he takes off the octopus, but in this, he takes off the weights, and he puts on this, like, gear to make him look like a fat bastard. And he goes around town, talking like this all the time, and it's just hilarious. It's almost like Bad Grandpa. Jackass Bad Grandpa, except with I think it's Melvin. I think that's the character he created. Just seeing this guy going around being this slob and this asshole. And according to Kenny, I think in the commentary, he said that this particular person's character is based on people that he's seen, and he wanted to take the piss out of it. And to be fair, I can understand. Kenny, he cheats while Spenny, he's lying on the ground, defeated. He gets the new weights, but he can't really put them in because, well, he fucking decided to put on a stupid contraption that doesn't fucking work. Like, there was no way Spenny was going to win this, like, at all. This is quite funny to think about, like, even despite the fact that Kenny technically cheats in this episode, Spenny wouldn't have won. Like, there's no way the fucker would have won it, especially the way he looks. But I digress. So Spenny eventually meets up with Kenny again, or Kenny comes back to the house. However, when Kenny, puts his finger to his lips, that's when Spenny notices something. He notices that the finger is long, meaning that that's clearly not Kenny, and he's not even speaking. So that means Kenny is upstairs in his room, pretending to be, in the competition when he's not. It's actually someone else. It's such a brilliant ruse, obviously. Kenny, from the get-go, he states that he went to a, visual effects artist. They got a mold of his head. They made a mask. They made the fat, character, Melvin's, sort of designed mask. And they decided, and from that point you realise, okay, Kenny's 10 steps ahead of Spenny. Spenny decides to use a spy camera and trying to look into the room. While Melvin is downstairs reading a magazine. And I will say this is the first episode in which I realised that Kenny didn't have a finger. Like, all this time I never realised he didn't have a finger until I watched this episode, and I realised, oh shit. And upon rewatching Kenny vs. Spenny, you start to realise, oh yeah, he doesn't really have a finger. So Spenny, he says, I've won. He takes off all his weight. He goes into the room, and the Kenny inside, his mask is got these no eyes, so it's clearly a fake. While Melvin is Kenny, and he's actually wearing the weights, because it turns out he went up into his room, put on the weights again, so it seems like he's not actually cheating. And it's just brilliant. I love the way that Spenny just turns around in utter silence and annoyance. It's brilliant. The particular humiliation here is that Spenny acts like a human bidet by spitting water at Kenny, and of course it sort of humiliates Kenny at the same time, but let's be honest, that's water going into someone's ass and splashing back down to your face. It's pretty rank. Overall, this is just a great episode. I love the concept of this episode. I love the planning and the scheming that goes on. I love the sort of 10 steps ahead that Kenny is when it comes to Spenny. I love Spenny getting pissed off throughout this episode, him being told that he's a bit stupid and didn't think ahead, or him thinking that he's won, or not realising that Kenny has always got a trick up his sleeve. It's just great from beginning to end. I love it so much. I mean, there are some iffy moments which begs the authenticity of this episode, Spenny not just barging into the room or using the spy camera again. But at the same time, how can you not love this episode? It's a really good episode. I love it. I really do. I think this is a great episode. And last but not least is Who Can Commit the Most Crimes. You see, season 4 he has 10 episodes. And Who Can Commit the Most Crimes is honestly the weakest episode of this series. It's funny. Series 4 has just been hitting the high notes all the way through up until the final episode. The final episode is easily the worst episode of this series. It's not a bad episode. I do like the idea and concept of it, but I feel like Who Can Piss Off More People did a better job, in my opinion, compared to this episode, which, this is a good stepping forward. A lot of the crimes are probably not really, obvious or, necessarily, well, not necessarily obvious, but not necessarily, real crime, so to speak, especially because they deleted a scene from the mini competitions where they spat grapes off of a rooftop, because that technically was a crime. And so, I do think a lot of the crimes in this episode are probably not real crimes. That said, I think it does a great job nonetheless. You have great moments from beginning to end with, Kenny just dominating Spenny, and Spenny, he's very... Spenny is very anxious. He doesn't really want to do this. He doesn't really want to do that, but he also knows that he needs to win. And so he just continuously tries again. Kenny ultimately gets disqualified because he gets arrested, which means that the competition just ends at that. The humiliation I do quite like. I like the fact that Kenny is in some stocks and everyone throws smarts at him. I love that humiliation. It's very simple, very basic, but yeah. However, again, this is a very weak episode. It feels very short of an episode. It's really weird to say that because all the episodes are the same length, but this episode feels strangely short. And I don't know. Once again, it's Spenny wins episode. Spenny didn't really win necessarily because Kenny got the most, but Kenny got arrested, so yeah, he did win by automation. But I have mixed feelings on this episode. It's not a great episode, and it's kind of a sore thumb in Series 4. Series 4 has had just fantastic episodes beginning to end, and then you get this episode and it's just a massive outlier compared to the rest. So yeah, I think this is easily the weakest episode of Season 4, but it's still okay. So that is basically it for the Series 4 review. Series 4 as a whole is a fantastic series. A lot of people consider it the best series. I can see why. From beginning to end, Series 4 just has hit after hit after hit. Every episode, except for the last one, is really, really good, fantastically so. There's plenty of memorable moments and plenty of episodes which I'd have in my top 10, maybe top 15. They really just hit the high notes. And, this is, to a lot of people, peak Kenny versus Spenny. I can see why. It's varied competitions. Some of them are very much, actual competitions rather than one cheating over the other. And even then you have very funny gags. You get great, individual moments, great competition ideas that vary from being tied to a goat to farting, to getting a boner or getting a stain. It's just the competition ideas all hit the right marks. The episodes are all entertaining except for the last one. And yeah, I just think this is a very good series, and so far this is probably the best of the show so far. Series 3 had some really weak episodes near the beginning, but then you had really good episodes towards the end and the middle. Series 2 had, really good episodes at the beginning, but then really bad episodes towards the middle and the end. Series 1, was very slow at times. This season just hits the right marks, it hits the right notes, and we get some really great moments. That's really, what else can I say? It's just really good. It's a massive step up in quality. Looking forward to what Series 5 has to offer, because Series 5 is very close in Series 4 in terms of quality. That's what I'll say, and I'll see you next time.